Hello everyone, thanks for joining us. So I'll quickly introduce the panel. To my immediate right we have Louise Pedersen, Managing Director of Free Media International. Next along we have Cathy, Payne, who's CEO of Endemol International. After that we have Ruth, Managing Director of ITV Studios Global Entertainment, and then Stuart, Baxter, President of International Distribution at Entertainment One. Now, if we've heard about platforms in the first session, I think what we want to talk about with this, in this conversation, is really how content is travelling around the world. It was always a global business, but increasingly so with global platforms and such like. And also for the distribution companies, the role they play in that, which is clearly much more than just turning up at a market and buying and selling. I think the distribution companies really have a role now in getting things made and making editorial choices, and we really could have a better panel in terms of working through some of those issues. So, Louise, clearly because you're directly from the Rockies, short straw perhaps, but you know the distribution business back to front, as everyone does here. I mean, just broadly, broad brush, it feels, as a reporter from the outside looking in, it's changed almost on its head in perhaps the last 3 to 5 years. Is that observation correct? And what's really driving that?
Yeah, I think it has changed very quickly. So 3 to 5 years ago, we were probably a little bit at the tail end of the extended period where you had shows that were pretty much fully financed by UK broadcasters, and distribution advances were fairly small. And I think what all of us did was then kind of take those programmes once they were broadcast and sell them internationally. I mean, that's a very simplistic way of doing it, but that's basically how it worked. I think since then, a number of things have happened. One, a sort of demand for content from our international buyers, and can we get enough of that from the kind of UK PSB traditional sector? So how do we get more content? And I think distributors have got much more involved in the early development and financing of content. And content has got an awful lot more expensive. So I think in terms of the risks that distribution companies are expected to take, it's got a lot higher. And with that, I think we probably all want a bit more input in what we are financing and selling.
And then Cathy, moving on to you. As with all free media, Endemol International is born out of that kind of super indie grouping. And it seems that whereas once the Hollywood studios dominated, in this new landscape, you guys are very much at the top table.
Well, yeah, as a big international company, like all of us are, with different production arms in different countries, there's a lot of clients, and yes, in those markets, you would say that if you're comparing to the Hollywood studios, a lot of the product we produced would command bigger audiences in those markets than what some of the Hollywood studio product would. So in those markets, and it can be a lot of different content, it can be scripted, non-scripted. You look at a market like Australia, obviously I'm Australian, so I come from there, and you look at the programs that are dominating the big linear audiences there. That's an unusual market, or a change in that market, so the majority of them are non-scripted for those.
And then just let's work down the panel, then get stuck into some of those points. Ruth, for ITV Studios, GE, it seems that a lot of the emphasis of the company, clearly you're aligned with an enormous commercial broadcaster, but a lot of the emphasis is on international growth. It seems that's part of Carolyn's plan and one of the key strategies, which must make it an interesting time to be running that part of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our heritage has been out of British content predominantly, and something that we've done very well for a long time. And I think whilst we're looking at more of an international focus, we've got more international content in our portfolio, which I think is really exciting because when you get into the skin of the UK industry, and it's a very crowded industry, it's actually also really exciting to try and get under the skin of some of the other markets, and we've been doing that particularly in the last few years with Scandinavia, France, Germany, and particularly where we've made investments into production companies like Cathay in Italy or Apple Tree up in Sweden, in Denmark rather, but they're across the Scandinavian market. So yeah, I think for us it's about working with British content, but also about how we can start to work more with some of the international great talent as well.
And certainly we need to talk about kind of that non-English language piece later, so let's revisit that. And Stuart, to get you involved. Now, you're president of TV at eOne. You've got a studio background, so you very much can, in terms of the sort of broad picture, you've seen how the business has changed, having worked with those Hollywood giants and now being a big independent studio. It seems that now the distribution company is front and centre as opposed to being LA screenings, kind of turning up at the end of the chain and selling stuff to a broadcaster.
Very much so. In a studio world, and it is 6 years ago, so that's 30 years and one before that, you really didn't get much influence in what program you distributed. In the independent world, and that's a function of time, we are right involved. We sit on the three-man greenlight committee deciding what shows we actually invest in, because nowadays shows are not made solely for one. Unless you're committing a show to a global streamer, then you're actually, it's a sum of parts. So international is very, very important.
So is the tremendous demand for content around the world what is really shaping up the business, or is it also a function of particularly drama getting much, much more expensive, which means more partners have to be involved?
I think it's both, actually. David in the previous session said something I haven't heard expressed before, which is in this non-linear world, people want more watch first run programming, more, less repeats. And that less repeats is a drive. The demand side's gone up significantly from consumers, but so has it from a number of new players in the market, which are global streamers. And that's created huge inflation in cost, and as a result, that cost needs to be shared around. So lots of forces moving at the same time.
It was interesting to hear that line about the fewer repeats, because that's not necessarily a good thing in terms of international distribution, because that means that you're getting big bang for your buck upon first play and first window, but not necessarily 10 years later.
Look, I've been in the industry quite a long time, clearly, but Warner, 20 odd years ago, we look at product in the first cycle would typically be generating 60% of the value. Today, a lot of the models that we're looking first cycle generating 70 to 80%. So second cycle catalog values. That's just a reflection of there's more value, but products also traveling more in that first cycle quicker. So when you roll something out, we launched Rookie last year, a US network show. It's basically everywhere in the world, about 2 countries, inside less than a year. That wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. That's just the way things are working.
And in each of the cases, all of the companies here being represented on stage have relationships with either production companies within the group, or there's kind of first look development deals. How fierce is the competition to get to the best sort of producer talent at the moment? Louise?
I think there is a lot of competition. That said, I think probably, I'll speak for us, we had a period where, particularly in the scripted space, we couldn't get quickly enough to get it out the door because the SWATs were extremely active in the co-production market. I think that has probably cooled off a bit. So I suspect that we're in for a little bit of a kind of correction around the levels of investment that have been made. And I think, to answer your question, the kind of impact of that is that we might be a little bit more cautious about how many first look deals we do and who we do them with. That said, I think there is still a real competition for producers who have a brilliant track record, or producers who we kind of have worked with before, who are starting up a new company, and I think we'll probably all be keen to keep doing those deals.
I mean, Cathy, in that environment, how does a company kind of distinguish itself and beat the others to getting that kind of first look development deal? If you choose that's someone you want to work with, is it who can write the biggest check? Is it more nuanced than that?
Well, there are certainly some people who would like to take the biggest check, and you can't blame them for that. And certainly, even with some of our internal companies, while we will always have the ideas to work together, you want people to want to work together. So you have to, when you're making investments, someone has to have the right to say no, and if someone can get an investment alternatively, they've got the right to go and seek that. I think it comes down to when you're competing for projects outside just financial terms, comes down to relationship, what your vision, how much you value, or what you see in the project. So I still think a lot of that comes into play. Your ability, depending what the project is, if it's scripted or unscripted, your ability to roll that out, what the parties are looking for. So we represent a number of third parties who might have a completely different goal for the program than what another one will. Say something like, maybe as an example, we're distributing Lego Masters, which was on Channel 4 here, and it's been reimagined in Australia, and it is kind of quite a reimagination. Well, the people involved in that, which is Lego and Tuesday's Child, they're different. They're after different goals in that rollout. But for that show, they were looking for who could I take this to, who has the ability with production companies to roll it out in a lot of territories.
Ruth, again, outside looking in, as a reporter, it feels very much like it's a producer's market. How have you seen the relationship between kind of the producer and distributor change? Is it, in fact, a producer's market, or am I mistaken?
I think it depends a bit on the genre, the type of content, and again, I think Cathy's right that different people have different aspirations to target different things. So if you look across the breadth of the portfolio of who you work with, it's about trying to align the right ambitions the best that you can. So in some cases, I think there are producers who are absolutely on fire at the top of their game, and they probably are driving more of the conversation than ever before, but they've absolutely earned that driving seat, and they're still fantastic people to work with because they've got a track record and success. And if I was to point one out right now, it's probably World, off the back of Line of Duty, Bodyguard, and that's really exciting for us. But I certainly feel like my relationship with them is slightly different at the moment than it might well have been 5 years ago if we were working together.
In what sense?
I knew you were going to ask that. Well, I think for them, I think one of the things you wanted to talk about was also in attracting talent. And I think for the distributors, the talent that we're looking to attract first and foremost with the producers and the creators. And we've always believed in being very creative-led, so we back that producer, but the producer has to attract the talent that can then be, whether it's writing, probably first and foremost, but also acting. And if you've got a hit, or two or more, then you can attract that talent in a different way. And I think that just changes the dynamics slightly, because it sort of makes it more exciting, but I always feel like I'm slightly putting that in their hands, which is, great, you can go and work with some really great talent and do things slightly differently because of that halo around you.
And Stuart, you made an interesting point about coming in early as the distribution company. We hear that time and again that increasingly the distribution entity wants to kind of be there from the start, almost at script stage, perhaps. And that presumably is because you're being asked to put up a bigger deficit against that. Has the level of risk that the distribution company shoulders increased over time?
Look, I think the one thing we all share is that we're not just distribution companies.
Sure.
Distribution is part of what we offer. So the relationships with producers, first and foremost, is a creative one. And how do we help improve those shows? How do you package, attract the talent? Then how do you fund the show? And then subsequently the distribution. But distribution is a critical part of it, because how do you make that show viable? So we spend an awful long time going, well, actually, for a UK-based show, do we bring in a US partner? Because the UK typically, in today's world, is probably only generating 30 to 40% of the budget. Okay? That's a huge deficit for anybody to step up to. What you typically do is you go and find a co-producer, US or elsewhere. Then you say, okay, now we're left with a deficit that's manageable. We're confident enough about the quality of the show. So have risks gone up? Yes, but you spend an awful lot of time mitigating risk by bringing in those co-producing partners.
I think as well as risk going up, I think reward has gone up. I think, again, to go back to the original sort of 5 years ago thing, we very rarely sold a scripted show or found a co-producer for a scripted show in the States. And now I think if we were all looking at a big scripted investment, you would be looking at that US co-producer as a kind of key part of it. So I think, yes, the risk has gone up, but if you get it right, the reward has gone up too, which is that's good for distribution, but ultimately it's very good for producers and good for the industry.
And good for talent,
Yeah.
because don't forget, one of the things that talent really want is their show out all over the world. We get lots of, when we were doing Sharp Objects with HBO, one of the things, Amy Adams was very specific, I only want the show to go to, I will be in it if it's on these networks. Okay, if it's, a secondary network, the very top tier talent is quite precious about where their product goes.
And I think even talking about 3 or 5 years ago, no doubt the streaming services, and it started with Netflix, had more non-American product on the service, and so it found an audience got to like that product. So now when you're looking for a co-production partner if it is in the US, there's many more places that you could take it to rather than maybe 5 years ago when for a British scripted you might have had 3 kind of calling doors to call out, where now when you're going through, we're just looking at lists last night of a show we're taking out for pictures, and there's a lot. Even the producer was going, that's a lot of money.
I think there's also a credit to the UK industry, just the sort of quality of drama that's been produced over the last 5 years, and just how that's changed, and the sort of storytelling has grown and ambition has grown. I think we rarely see, or probably the majority of the projects and developments that we see coming out of the UK are much bigger, more ambitious projects for drama in particular.
And as budgets continue to increase, is it a case of making kind of fewer bets on bigger projects, or do you kind of spread your bets, as it were? Because there's only, even you work for companies that have the capital to invest in lots of content, but at several million pounds, dollars, euros per episode, there has to be a ceiling to how much you can do.
Sorry.
I was going to say there also is a ceiling as to how much is available. So the two things are quite linked. And I think it is really understanding the portfolio that you have and the buyers and what the market wants and where you think you can feasibly sell that content around the world and what's doable.
I also don't think it's always about a single project on its own. We're big organisations, we've got lots of shows, so it's about a portfolio and a balanced portfolio. There are some shows that will say this show lends itself to a streamer, and by doing it with the streamer to a degree, you do a show from Netflix or Amazon, you have a guaranteed return. That's great for keeping the factory floor working and people being very, very busy, but it does cap your upside. On the other hand, you say, so managing a portfolio of risk, you say, okay, knowing I got that there, I can take more risk on this show over here. So you're always looking at the portfolio.
And just in terms of that, because clearly you understand how the funding works as well as anyone, at the very high end of scripted, can budgets kind of keep increasing year on year, or do you sense that we might have reached a peak of some description?
The best talent continues to attract a lot of offers. You're probably changing to a world where 10, 15 years ago, you had almost average type pricing. The top shows are 20% more expensive than the average shows, and the less shows were 20% under. Today, the less than average shows just don't get sold full stop. People only want the best shows.
I think there's two things. One is that if you're talking to Amazon, Apple about an original money really isn't an issue. So in that sense, budgets are going to keep going up because I think we've had a couple of cases where Apple have said we really like this, but can you do it bigger, i.e. spend more money on a really more expensive talent? So I think that's one kind of section of it. But I think it's also important in our business, and we've all mentioned the word portfolio, which I suspect features frequently as we kind of all report to our kind of various boards. But still our biggest selling show is a detective series that is financed by a UK ESB and us, with us not coming in very much. So you can all get very seduced by this really kind of exciting, high-end, expensive show.
That's a great point. The Midsummer presumably costs less per episode than it's made on a relatively modest budget, and yet it's a huge international success. The budget doesn't come to quality.
And I think one of the things as well is in this world where you're seeing this massive kind of SVOD consolidation, and they're taking lots of rights. There's still a demand from our traditional free TV partners for shows that are going to do.
And I think that's exactly right. It's sort of a multi-tiered industry at the moment. We talked a little bit earlier about sort of windows and how much you probably realise in your first cycle versus long term. I know there's various industry debates about that at the moment, but Marples, Poirots, we've been selling for over 25 years, and we still license those every year to buyers. And there's different people at different stages of their evolution in the TV market, and whether it's still DVT players or new OTT platforms. There's a value of content, old, new, big, small, factual, scripted, I think, to everyone. I think what's important for all of us in our jobs across that portfolio is understanding where the strengths are and in which the market's the focus.
I mean, is there possibly a disconnect between what's coming to market, what's available at a major TV market, which is often very highly serialised, high-end drama, versus what particularly free-to-air broadcasters in Europe want, is kind of procedural, repeatable stuff, which seems fairly thin on the ground? No?
I would think it's, again, a balanced product. When you go to a market, you may have that show, your bigger budget one that's packaged and you're out there seeking, but a lot of the distribution day-to-day business is not always about those shows. If you've got a show that is extremely expensive, it's going to be a long time before you may see any other royalties from it. So you've got to think, well, that's what I'm going to make out of the production model and financing. But again, just like everyone else, our second highest grossing show last year was a show that hasn't been produced for 11 years. And every year it just continues to deliver revenue. There's a lot of episodes of it, but it is...
And the show is?
McLeod's Daughters. And we've got it in 26 languages, but the value of that product, it's on, I think, about 12 non-exclusive AVOD sites, and all of a sudden you just can't believe the minutes that's being watched. But also we had mentioned when we talk about the value, when we talk about the challenges in funding scripted shows, but then non-scripted, unscripted, however you like to define it, there is a real distribution market for unscripted shows. I mean, we have a lot of that in our catalogue, you have a lot in your catalogue. Some of those shows for us, those are key. And again, broadcasters are after those, they're franchises.
But this is not for your sales team kind of out there doing deals. Presumably it takes as much time and effort to sell that unscripted show, but the returns are wholly different to that big ticket drama.
Sometimes you can make a lot more money on those unscripted shows because they may come to you with very little deficit. They're funded. So I think that you would be quite surprised at some of the license fees. There's some unscripted shows in our catalogue where we actually, from our linear broadcasters, get a higher license fee for those than we do some of our big scripted shows.
In some markets, for sure.
Yeah.
And in terms of the SVOD players, clearly those Netflix and Amazon, all to come, have shaken up every part of the chain in that TV world. How do you, is it case by case how you select, assuming they want one of your properties, whether you do the global deal and recognise the value there versus kind of territory by territory? Obviously, it's a nice choice to have, but in those instances, what's the thinking?
Well, for me, I always think when you're taking out a show and discussing with a producer at the early stage, you're producing a show, you want it to be successful. I come back to the fundamental. On what platform does that show have the best chance of being successful and being renewed, or if it's a one-up reaching the audience that the creative intended to reach? And you know, it's interesting. There's a show we're working on hasn't been announced yet, with a big piece of talent, and you know, I was talking to the producer, we were cheeky that the approaches that are being made, but there's a real vision of where that show will go and where it can be successful. And that may not be on a streaming platform for that particular show. Sorry, not being able to get into details, but when you make a show, not everything's going to work on every channel.
In terms of what we can see coming along is a quota for those streaming platforms, that they need X amount of content from Europe. They're a long way from getting there. Are you seeing, well, on the ground, because you're at the sharp end, that there's been an uptick in the amount that the Netflix and Amazons of the world are buying in terms of kind of those finished tape sales? Has there been a knock-on yet?
Certainly seeing an uptick in what they're looking to commission as originals from producers we have in European countries. Definitely. I think they are still working on their I think they're thinking it's still maturing in terms of how they're acquiring non-English language, but they're definitely going down a commissioning route quite heavily, I think, at the moment, from what we see.
Yeah, very active non-English commissioning, especially in they love a good genre piece.
I think the library's actually been a bit tougher, and perhaps it's just for us, but I think certainly, again, Netflix launched on the back of some very big library acquisition deals, probably from all of us, and you know, we've seen the kind of winnowing out of that of the shows that are very successful, working very well there, or I think probably, you know, or Cathy in particular has probably had a version of this and moved towards sort of commissioning it themselves and doing it as an original for a show that they really love. So it feels like they're moving more, and also in Amazon now you have this situation where you can actually put your library in the AVOD space and launch your own channel. So I think those streamers buying libraries has got a little bit tougher. Perhaps that's just us.
I think that's right. Certainly we see Netflix started on the back of studios in particular, fed this very hungry beast that bought an awful lot of library. Netflix at that stage didn't have, frankly, the competence to commission. It wasn't in that world. It's learned that business very quickly. Spends a much higher percentage of its money on original programs. I think library, they've got data, so the library they're taking is the only library that's really performed for them. So there's less speculative library purchases nowadays, and they still do an awful lot, but you said there also suddenly we had Designated Survivor, an ABC show that did really, really well. At the end of 2 seasons, ABC said, second season didn't perform as well, we'll probably stop it. Netflix were very quick to put their hands up and say, that works really, really well for us, we want to keep going, we'll fund it on a go-forward basis.
And then with something like Rookie, that you didn't do the global deal. In that case, you went territory by territory.
Yeah, no, look, when we did Designated, we looked at both options. When we did Rookie, we were quite clear that we knew Nathan Fillion was a huge global star already. Castle had been on air all over the world, 8 seasons, and we felt it was pure free TV. That show was best on free TV, so selling it to MCs and people like that, Rye. So we took a conscious decision. We got a Netflix global offer, and we said, thank you, no thank you, we're going the sum of the parts route.
And we can see if there are, there's a couple of global players, there's about to be a number who start holding back their own content. They will start, all the media, less clear, but one would assume if their streaming service does incredibly well at some point, that would be the same. Does that create an opportunity in the market when some of the major players have become very vertically integrated, holding on to their own content. Do you kind of spy an opportunity there to fill that, plug that gap?
Yeah, definitely. We're never the optimist. I think then absolutely. I think we've the distribution business generally, American content has been probably the most sort of the most premium for buyers, followed probably by British content, then followed by others. And I think what we've seen increasingly over the last few years probably is that British content has become stronger, and US content probably has become a little less important, and output deals have fallen away for the studios. So it's not surprising that they've reached that tipping point where going on their own is the right decision for some of them. So I think for British content, or for any actually international content, there's an opportunity to be able to fill that space with what is still very good, strong quality storytelling. And I think as the world continues to globalise, and it sort of feels like we have in many ways, but the non-English language content is really just at the start of that, where people are often, and in many countries, if you're going to double subtitle it from English anyway, what is the difference really in subtitling or dubbing it from French or from Swedish or English? So I think there's a good opportunity for new content to be able to take more space.
Well, one of our production companies is Filmfestivals up in the Nordics. A lot of good stuff comes from the Nordics. It's amazing. And they did Bron, the original, or is it known here as The Bridge. It's amazing that when you think it was on BBC 4, and then the last season played on BBC 2 on Friday nights at 9 o'clock and did really well. It's amazing that transition of how markets have changed.
I think really the whole foreign language, English language content, that is sort of blurring. I think what we're all interested in watching is really good
content.
And so again, for us as a distributor, we don't kind of try not to make a distinction between that's foreign language and this is English language. It's just, does it fit what we're looking for? Do we love the talent? Do we love the writing? So it's just got much more siloed as I think we and the world become more global in terms of what we're prepared to watch.
And I always think that whatever channel is having content, whatever you watch, it's got to be good. Whatever budget it's made or designed for, the good product will find a home.
And that's about good storytelling. That you suddenly say, there's great IP, great books written all over the world, great literature. And that's what we see coming to the fore, that's what's travelling. We're working on a project in Italy with Dolce Vita, doing Gaddafi, which is actually, obviously, it's been produced in 3 countries because he was much more travelled than I think many people are aware. We've now got an English language one coming with ITV, with Tenacity. So it doesn't matter, it's about the best story wherever it originates, and whatever language, and multi-language. You see Deutschland 83, Narcos. Again, you don't need to stick singly to one language either.
And I think also really good storytelling you've seen in non-scripted or factual or crime. And look at the growth of that serialised true life crime, and that we've all watched. I'm sure many of us watched a number of the big ones and been so intrigued. But they're the ones that work are the really good ones, and the ones that are really well told.
I've got one more thing I'd like to ask, but before that, I just open up to the floor to see if there are any questions. Just one here first, please. If you could just say where you're from or who you are.
Sorry, Paul Craig, View Torch Pictures, independent production company. What's the percentage, balance-wise, between brand new talent, say new producers, new writers, etc., and established talent that you worked with before? What would you say the percentages nowadays?
I can't give you a percentage, but what I can say is that we have 10 first look deals with companies outside the E3 group, and I think 3 of them are with brand new startups. So what's that, 30%? But we're constantly talking to new talent. I think you have to, to keep to make make sure that you're talking to people with fresh ideas and a fresh approach and the sort of next generation. So, yeah, hopefully that answers that.
Okay, we've got two more. I'll just come. Can we just take that one? The gentleman at the top.
Hi, Tom Tomasi. I'm curious as to your view about device-led programming and Jeffrey Katzenberg's business, and whether you as distributors are going to be starting to think about investing in content that's specifically designed for mobile.
I think two of us have already invested in
Yes.
Payne. Specifically, we've also bought another company called Canvas Media who do short form in the US, and we're funding a couple of international projects in short form. So, do we think it's an important growth market? Yes.
Yeah, I think likewise from an ITV point of view, having made the investment into Quibi, actively looking at how we develop content for that platform, but also made various digital investments in the US focused on short form creation development, and are absolutely intrigued by how that market will grow.
I think I'm going to be the kind of naysayer here. we have a company in the group, Little Dot Studios, who creates a lot of short form material for YouTube. And currently, I think that for us is the focus for it, and I'm not sure that we see much of a kind of secondary market for it at the moment.
And I think for us, we've got, for that world, or the mobile world, I think for device, just think, I don't really care what device you watch your TV on. In some of our big markets and production markets, there's a lot of device watching, like in India, but it's more about we're repurposing certain content that's in our catalogue for that. We are producing for a number of those new services too.
Okay, I think we had one down in the corner here.
It's Leo from Variety. Question for Stuart Baxter. Could you clarify what Mark Gordon's position is at eOne and whether he'll still be president in 1 year's time?
Oh, that's me.
I think you've already had a public response to what I describe as scurrilous rumour. Mark will absolutely be with eOne in a year's time. Mark is, I spent a lot of Monday night talking to Mark about a new project that he's going to bring to market next May. Mark has been absolutely the vanguard of everything we do. He's been our Chief Creative Officer. Over the last year, Mark has probably been less, he's had a broader role and probably less producing, and the stuff he loves most is producing. Is he going to continue to do that? Is he going to be part of the eOne family? Are we going to have all his shows? Absolutely.
And then, given there's one question I did want to ask everyone. Yesterday in the UK, as we touched upon, Ofcom said that the BBC can have provisionally said, it was minded that the BBC can have a 12-month catch-up window, and even longer for other types of content. Does that must prove, in terms of when you sit down with broadcasters to do deals, those catch-up windows are clearly changing and evolving. Are you getting paid for those windows? And is that a conversation? Is that an argument that you have to have time and time again? Is there a settled kind of pattern in terms of what people will pay and for how long? Particularly thinking about catch-up.
I think there's some broadcasters who want a larger rights selection than others, and there's some who do pay for that and do put a value on the table that reflects that. You know, in any market, if you've got a new show, ideally there's a lot of rights available, but it will be a question of funding, and if it's a show where you're only paying 30% of the budget as the lead market and you want a longer catch-up, and that might restrict bringing in someone who's interested in a secondary window in that market, of course it's going to have a discussion on it. It's going to be a big discussion point in your financing plan.
Because presumably these broadcasters want to fend off the threat from the streamers, and
I think
you want to get paid.
Yeah, potentially. I think I do see part of our role in is to make sure the content will get made, and I think and hope and I'm confident that there is a conversation that can always be had, because I don't think it's in anyone's interest for shows to fall down because we couldn't get the right sort of windowing and partnerships in place. But I think that's the fascinating thing about our jobs at the moment is just how all of the different territories are changing with regards to what rights they want and how broadcasters are reacting to growth of SVOD or doing more AVOD. And I think it's a bit of a minefield, and I think it's really important that we understand how the value is transferring between linear and non-linear television, and ultimately to be able to sell content over and over again, to be able to realise the increased investments that we're making, that risk that we're taking. That is all part of understanding how we divide rights, value them, and get paid for them.
I can see that Ruth literally took us down to 0 seconds. That's perfect. Please join me in saying thank you to the tremendous panel.